I'm Don Lombardi. I'm really excited tonight to have this great panel of artists here with us who are legends in the music industry. I've done a lot of interviews here on Drum Channel, and I'm thinking of this not only as an interview, but more of an interview of the music business, so we can hear about the business and their lives, going back to the times when, you know, rock and roll was in its infancy. And it's really important, I think, for you to understand where they came from so you know where you're going to. There's a lot of years of history here on the couch. We won't add them all up, but there's a lot of years of history here, and I think we can certainly all learn from them. Let me introduce Denny Tedesco. Denny is a documentary filmmaker. His father was Tommy Tedesco, one of the main members of the Wrecking Crew, and he did a movie which had over 100 top hits in it, of the best hits of all time, which was a challenge. We'll talk about that, of course. Memorializing his father and the career of all the musicians who played with his father in a band that I think is one of the most popular bands of all time that a lot of people didn't know about and wouldn't have known about if it hadn't been for the dedication of Denny to put this together. Tommy Tedesco, his father, is probably one of the most recorded guitarists of all time. Don Randy is here with us, a partner in crime of the Wrecking Crew with Hal Blaine, of course, piano player, more properly, I guess you say keyboard player today, but when I see him, you're a piano player to me, Don.
Yeah,
and in the 70s, he did something which I think every musician in the world will thank him for, as they have for decades, and it was quite an undertaking, I think, but I'm going to talk to you a little more about that as the show goes on. And at about that same time, I think you started Quest, Don Randy and Quest, many Grammy nominations, and has a new one, which is really cool, called Good Jazzy Vibrations. Also joining us, a studio musician from back in the day who was kind of underground. He was a guy that was in the trenches doing it all the time, mild-mannered as he was, but he could go Clark Kent on you when he went in there and put on his uniform. Frank DeVito was a student of Jimmy Chapin's. All of you Drum Channel fans out there certainly know who Jimmy Chapin is. Played with a long list of artists going way back, I would say. Benny Goodman, Buddy DeFranco, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Terry Gibbs Trio for a long time. That's kind of when I came
on the road with Terry, and that's I'm still shaking.
That's when I came into the scene. And then later in the session scene, which is what he's going to talk about today, where he had recorded with Frank Sinatra, several of the Beach Boys, and of course Hal Blaine, who is not only a legend, well, an icon.
In your own mind.
Right, in your own mind, right? I want to go back to one of the days, you know, and I won't quiz you as to what actually happened on that particular day, but it was back in 1964, was in August, I believe. I Get Around with the Beach Boys, and a week later, it was Everybody Loves Somebody with Dean Martin. Now, those are two records that I would think are diametrically opposed in terms of the artist, the producer, the contractor, getting the same musicians for both of those records. What was going on back in those days? Hal, I'll start with you. The record industry in general, what was it going through in the early 60s?
Well, I was very fortunate when I got out of school in Chicago and I came to LA. I keep referring to it as falling into a vat of chocolate. To be part of the Hollywood scene and the studio scene, and all of the great artists, I mean, all of the Sinatras, all of the Rat Pack, all of the Brat Pack, when the younger kids, I was lucky enough to work with all these kids. I'm just heading into the 6,000th single that I was lucky enough to work on. And 8 of those became records of the year. You know, that's the top Grammy. And so I couldn't get any luckier. And it was just, I mean, all of us were just all of a sudden thrown into this soup bowl of chocolate. That's all I can tell you. It was unbelievable. And so, you know, we built our families and our homes and our whatever we had because of our studies. There was no drugs with us, you know, that type of thing. And if I had to start telling you stories, would take hours.
Well, and if you had to go through your discography, it would take hours for both your gentlemen
Oh,
also.
God.
But talking about those 6 years in a row, let me just run through those quickly. And then as we're talking, we're going to roll credits underneath of all the artists that both of you played with. And not only that, the #1 hits that you played on. Just the #1 hits you're going to be seeing as we're talking here. If it was #2, it's not even on this list. So there's 10 times more people than what we're talking about. But it was Tijuana Brass, Taste of Honey, Strangers in the Night, Frank Sinatra. Next year, Fifth Dimension, Up, Up and Away, Aquarius, Let the Sun Shine In. Next year, Simon and Garfunkel, Mrs. Robinson, and Bridge Over Troubled Water. And the beat kind of goes on and on. Don, back in those days, again, there was two different, somebody was selling one style of music and somebody was selling another style of music. Where do you think the world was and how was it turning around?
Well, the world was, for us, Los Angeles. Though that didn't mean if somebody said to you, gee, I like what Floyd Kramer played on that record, we had to come up with it. If they said, could you make it a little more like Ray Charles? Sure. We weren't embarrassed by that. We could clone anyone because we listened to all that music, fortunately, so that if someone asked us, we could do it. But the most important thing I know for myself, I'm not speaking for Hal, is that we played on 21 million selling records in a row for one producer. His name was Phil Spector. And when everybody heard that, they went, oh my goodness, we got to get that band because they're the good luck guys and we'll get hits with them. And fortunately, they were absolutely right because we got hit after hit after hit. And it didn't stop in '63. It went right all through the '70s also. It may have tapered off, but it kept right on going. And it was important for all of us. And I wish I could say I was the only piano player, but I wasn't. There were many of us. Larry Necto, who incredible on Bridge Over Troubled Water. Lincoln Mayorkas, Mike Rubini. In the very beginning, Plas Johnson's brother, Ray Johnson, played. And I'm sure Aldo Lori, who ended up being the producer of Glenn Campbell, for all the piano players. And there were so many great guitar players, and everybody could intertwine. We could be working for H.B. Barnum one day, and then Lee Hazelwood the next day. Now, you want to talk about two people in a different place, there they are. You walk from a Lou Rawls date, which would happen to me. I was doing a Lou Rawls date, and as I walked out of the door, two piano players had left a Frank Zappa date, and they grabbed me as I was getting ready to go home, and I ended up playing on a Frank Zappa date at that time, Lumpy Gravy. And there you are. It was just one of those things, and it kept going on and on and on. And you'd always see the same faces. It was either Hal Blaine or Earl Palmer. A little later on, Jimmy Gordon would come in. Frank DeVito would come in on some of the dates. And it just kept growing and growing, and it was nonstop. And then he and I would go on the road with Nancy Sinatra and have the greatest time in the world. It was some of our best times, and we became very close friends. Actually, the first date we did was for Phil Spector, and then we didn't do anything for like a month or so. And I happened to have a trio gig at a place called the Saharan in Chicago. And I'm there, and I'm walking down the hotel lobby to go to our lounge gig. We weren't in the main showroom. And I see this guy who I only met for a little while before. And I said, Hal? And he says, Don? He was there with Patti Page. And we were in the same hotel at the same time in 1963 in Chicago. Pretty amazing. And we've been friends ever since.
Well, I can't quite digest the fact that it was luck, as you happen to just say that. You know, there was a lot more going on than luck there. I know from Hal's career on some of the interviews we've had here, there was a lot of preparation going into what he brought to that table in those days. And what do you think, when you were a young kid, when your dad would come home, what do you think was kind of a little more the secret ingredient? What did these guys have?
You know, well, first of all, Dad just went to work, so I have no idea what went on there. He was just like any other dad. But what was different was you're talking about, you got to realize the business is so young at that point in terms of rock and roll. You're only talking about 61, 62, 63. Rock and roll is only there from 55, let's say. It's not really, the record labels aren't even sure if it's a business. So that's why they're doing records for Patti Page or Dean Martin. You know, they're still making records for that demographic. So when the rock and roll starts coming, this is their opportunity to get in. And what pushes them, though, is radio. now radio, it's like this vicious circle. Record labels need radio to push that top 40. They start pushing, they go, we can make money off of this. So now they're going like this. The record labels, Liberty Records, an album a day. Warner Brothers and then Reprise, and they just kept going.
And what was also very interesting about that time, there were cover records.
Yeah.
There wasn't just one hit. You'd be doing sessions. I remember your dad saying to me, he says, didn't we play this the other day? And I said, we did play it the other day.
Well, it's the famous one with He's a Rebel, with Darlene Love.
Sure.
Did it as the Blossoms. And, and then Phil gave it to the Crystals. And that really upset everybody. But Snuff already done it. You guys had already done it with Snuff, like the week before, and there's a little tension, but supposedly Snuff said it wasn't between Phil and I, they were pissed off at the publisher for doing that. And he said, but Phil made the better album, he said.
Looking at the day, Frank, while they were doing, what they were doing as the Wrecking Crew, and you and a few other drummers were out there, as studio musicians also, playing in town.
Yeah,
how
all
did you
trying to
look at
play like this guy. During that period, I came to town. I was playing jazz on the road with Terry Gibbs. Came into town, and fortunately got to meet Hal and Earl Palmer and guys on staff like Irv Cotler and who's the other great drummer and all those Sinatra records.
Oh.
When you say
he was on Tommy Dorsey's
explain
band.
when you say on staff, explain what that means on staff.
Well, on staff means back then, ABC, CBS, NBC, they all had orchestras on staff. Guys
on payroll,
who worked there on payroll, and all the movie studios had all these big orchestras. Now that's gone. No, at any rate, I remember just. To me, to get into the studios after being on the road and one-nighters and buses and that kind of thing, it seemed to me, gee, I want to be like Hal Blaine and Earl Palmer, and you guys had just started, not too long before that. I remember when on one of the first dates I did, you probably recommended me. It was Ernie Freeman. Ernie Freeman.
Greatest.
He said. I remember how he described the tune that we were going to play. He said, well, it goes like, the rhythm goes, cha, 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 the twist. This is like the twist. Well, that's one of the first times that I remember on a record date where we started playing, where rock and roll was straight 8. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Before that, even Elvis and some of the other guys, it was like country swing, right?
Sure.
It was dotted.
Huh?
Yeah.
Dotted, dotted.
Yeah. Then it, to me, that was the beginning of the rock thing. And anyway, getting. I want to talk about Hal. During that period, and I won't mention all the other drummers, but one time I'm on a session and I'm playing maracas or something, and Hal's playing drum set. And just finished a take, and it was so great. It was such a great pocket and really nice. And I said to Hal, man, that was great, Hal. It really sounded so good. Really. And he says, anybody can do that. Any of you guys can do that. I said, we're all trying to do it, but we ain't doing it. Everybody, not only were we trying to copy and play like Hal, but he had blue drums. We had blue drums, right? We had blue drums. You had a black car. We had a black car. Huh?
They did sell a lot of blue sparkle drums.
I was out at the factory with Ludwig one time, and they took us on a yacht in Lake Michigan there, and I said kiddingly to Bill Ludwig Jr., I said, you should call this boat the Hal Blaine. and I said, because he said, oh, yeah, selling a lot. Yeah, we sold a lot of drums, right?